The track was being done by my cousin Brian at Studio 3 in Western Studios with the Wrecking Crew. It was a great track. That intro is it's like a prelude to some kind of great piece of music. And the track was going on, but he didn't have the words. So I stepped out in the hallway while they were still finishing the track and wrote out, "I want to give the accolades to all the great girls around the different parts of the U.S. East Coast girls are hip, Southern girls, the way they talk, Midwest farmers' daughters, Northern girls, the way they kiss, keep their boyfriends warm at night." So it was it's kind of a travelogue from a young guy's fantasy. And then it talked about all girls around the world and Hawaiian Island dolls and by a palm tree in the sand. And then the chorus, "Wish they all could be California girls." That's Brian Wilson. He came up with the brilliant high parts and did all the vocal arrangements and stuff. But I came up with all the lyrics for that song. And it's one of our favorite songs. It's one of the favorite songs of a lot of people. Yeah, fortunately. Tell me in brief, if you will, how Good Vibrations came to be. Good Vibrations was a monumental effort. It started months before the song came out. My cousin Brian went in with the best studio musicians in LA. They called themselves the Wrecking Crew. It's so funny how they got the term the Wrecking Crew, because all the more respected musicians that played in symphonies and various orchestras and big bands thought that these guys would wreck the business, because they're doing rock and roll. So they became the Wrecking Crew. They're brilliant and great musicians. And he would go to Gold Star Recording, where Phil Spector did his stuff, to get a certain sound. And that, when I say he, I mean Brian, and he would go to Studio 3 at Western Recorders on Sunset Boulevard because it had other sounds. And so he did 3 or 4 or 5 studios, and we ultimately did the vocals for the single record. But this took several months, because he did sections of the track and experimented with the different sections and different sounds and different tempos. So the composite was finally put together. And I was due to write the lyrics, and I put it off. And I'm pretty good at procrastinating. So I wrote the words. I dictated a poem while I was driving in our XKE to the studio on the way to the session. I dictated it to my then-wife Suzanne, who was pregnant with our daughter Haley. And I said, "Take this down. I love the colorful clothes she wears and the way the sunlight plays upon her hair." This was 1966. The track was incredible. It was so unique, mystical sounding, with the theremin going on. Nobody had ever used a theremin in rock music. But what is a theremin? Theremin is an electrotheremin. It was invented by a Russian inventor, and it has this weird sound, ooh. You've only heard it in scary movies and TV shows and stuff like that. It was an eerie sound, but it was brilliant with good vibrations. So I came up with the lyrics just on the way to the studio, and my cousin Carl sang it beautifully. So it had the structure of all these different studios and different types of experimentation, but it had the spontaneity of the lyrics that I wrote about a girl who was all into peace and love and flower power. It was 1966, and the psychedelic era of music was going on in Southern California. I know it's hard to choose. What's your own personal favorite? There are so many favorites, Dan, because it's about your mood. We did a song the night of November 23rd, was it, in 1963. My cousin Brian and I got together and wrote this beautiful, haunting melody. Beautiful song. Great harmonies. And were awakened in the morning to the news that President Kennedy had been taken to the hospital in Dallas. So we all know what happened there. But it was a very sad, melancholy song, and the lyrics were not changed to conform to that event, but it was about the loss of someone you love. But still, you had felt that love at one time. And so, even though it was not great how it ended, there was still something good about it. Well, what was going on is practically an idyllic setting for us, middle-class kids growing up in Southern California. My grandfather, Love, and my grandmother and grandfather Wilson, they had the good sense to migrate from rural Louisiana and Kansas to come to California, which is where I was born and my cousins were born. So my grandfather called California the ultimate, which I think, that was right on. He came from outside of Shreveport, Louisiana, to California, worked very hard in the sheet metal industry, and provided us a really good life and a beautiful environment. Southern California in the late 50s, early 60s was fantastic. We were just a few miles from the beach, the mountains, the desert. You know, we'd take vacations to go to Mexico on the weekends, and it was a fantastic experience growing up. Well, one of the many things the Beach Boys have been known for over the years is the vocal harmonies. Oh yeah! Of all of you, how did you reach that unique combination of vocal harmonies? The harmonies that distinguished the Beach Boys from so many other rock groups came from my childhood growing up. Every holiday, every birthday party, every special occasion at my house, my mom was such a fan of music that everything centered around music. I mean, you could have the uncle that's not talking to my dad, or you could have somebody didn't pay somebody back or got drunk at a party or embarrassed somebody, or you didn't always get along maybe 100%. But music was the bond that brought everybody together. And the singing of 2 and 3 and 4-part harmonies, that was something we loved to do. So the essential ingredient, I believe, in our music is the love of getting together and creating those sounds together. And because we're brothers and cousins and so on, I think there's sort of a genetic kind of aspect to it, you know? The Everly Brothers had such a beautiful blend, they harmonized. They were a big inspiration to us. But then the 4 freshmen were these fantastic musicians and great singers with these great intricate chord progressions that inspired us and made us want to achieve more in our particular abilities. So those were the inspirations. But the basis of it all was the love of getting together and harmonizing, that had nothing to do with music or fame or fortune or any of those kinds of aspirations. Well, what's been the best of it? Let's face it, it's been a long, mostly good road for you, at least professionally. Personally, we'll talk about a few things later. Yeah, I figured. But what's been the best of it? Where was the absolute best moment for you? There are so many great moments. I'd say 3 years ago, we were backstage and a young girl who was a Make-A-Wish type girl, she was going through some challenges health-wise, 10 years old, and I asked her, "What's your favorite Beach Boys song?" She says, "For '09. Well, for '09 was the B-side or the flip side of the 45 single Surfin' Safari, with the backside being 409. It was about a hot Chevy car, you know? And so that blew my mind. It came out 40 years before she was born, and here it is, her favorite Beach Boy song.